What happens when they're successful? You're probably marking hit points. These represent the physical injuries your character endures when they're hit by an adversary or hurt themselves traversing difficult environments. So let's say your character has a major threshold of 8 and a severe threshold of 16. If they take 9 damage, that would be considered major damage, which marks 2 hit points. There's no math here. All you have to do is compare the numbers, figure out where it falls in your thresholds, and mark your hit points.
Wounds? Daggerheart has been making its rounds in media, and despite it not being a game that I was particularly interested in for my home game, I decided to take a look through its SRD, and its health abstraction started to scratch my brain a little bit, and I realized that it was just one little nudge away from having a wound system. Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and I've made wound systems kind of my thing. And so in today's video, we're going to talk about how to add wound systems into existing games and then apply what we've learned to Daggerheart, seeing if we can build something that you'd be able to use in your home game of Daggerheart, especially for their more dark and gritty settings like Age of Umbra. Now, before we begin, this video was not sponsored by Daggerheart in any way, and I'm not here to actually make a judgment call about the system itself. We're here to just look at one piece of that whole, because I think every game has something to teach us. But I did actually have a sponsor for this video. I will timestamp any sponsored sections in all of my videos below, so feel free to skip this next part if you feel the need to. But if not, let's take a look at who decided to be my first sponsor. Dice Nest is an online retailer for premium TTRPG dice, and this is the first sponsor that I've had on this channel. Now, they did send me 2 sets of some of their dice as compensation for plugging their product here on my channel. But as with any future sponsors I receive, I retain the right to say what I think about this product, and I will only ever talk about products that I think are worth looking at. So, in brief, these are very high quality and expensive dice sets, and I'm the kind of player that likes really meaty dice, really heavy dice, and these ones fit the bill. The materials were very clean, the edges nice and sharp, they felt very balanced, and you pick them up and they felt premium. So I have nothing but positive things to say about this product. But please note that these dice are from a distributor in China currently who assured me that they will not have any issues distributing to the United States or parts of the EU, but definitely do any due diligence before ordering anything internationally, depending on where you are in the world. But overall, I had a pleasant experience working with them, and these dice are quite nice, and I can't wait to use them at my home D&D game or when I run some Tales from Elsewhere. All right, let's get to the matter at hand. First order of business is to take a look at Daggerheart's health abstraction, as it's a little unconventional. Now, Daggerheart's a game that attempts to mix elements of more rules-light or narrative-first structures with some traditional ones you'd find in a game like D&D, and its health abstraction is definitely erring a little bit more on the traditional side of things, so let's go over it very briefly. Daggerheart uses very traditional damage rolls. You're rolling a 1d8 plus 1d6 plus 3 or some such to deal damage to characters. However, rather than that being subtracted directly from a health pool, instead they use damage thresholds to control how much HP you lose. Characters only have a few hit points, starting at around 5, and depending on how much damage they took, they remove 1 to 3 of those. If you take less than the first threshold, you take minor damage, which is 1 hit point. If it's more than that, you take major damage, which is 2 hit points, and if you take more than that middle one, you take severe damage, which is 3 hit points. And you can maybe already see where I'm going to be going with this later. Rather than the linear scaling of traditional hit point based systems where your hit points go up and up and up and up, your HP actually stays fairly flat in this game, with only maybe a few points going up over time. Instead, your damage thresholds increase as you grow in level, making it less likely for you to receive those more severe severe damage. And this is a very clean mathematical structure because hit points as a system often creates a lot of bloat over time. Many games you start out with maybe 5 to 10 hit points, but as you progress you'll have over 100, and this creates a lot of scaling issues. It means low-level threats often aren't threatening at all at higher levels simply because they don't have the hit points and damage to match your scaling. that kind of hit point scaling can also make fights not necessarily more interesting, but just longer, because it increases the level of attrition needed to succeed. And I think the designers of Daggerheart have done a good job with their selection of health abstraction. I think this is a solid mathematical structure for scaling toughness over time without making the game a slog. But it is still a hit point system underlying all of this. This would still be a traditional abstraction, we might say. Each hit point loss doesn't really do anything until you've lost the last one, and then you can enter some sort of dying state and they have death moves and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it is a traditional hit point attrition system. And there ain't nothing wrong with using hit points as your health abstraction in a game. There's a reason for its ubiquity. But let's juxtapose that now with what a wound system is in brief. Wound systems attempt to make exchanges of violence come with more mechanical and narrative impact, making combat more gruesome, gritty, and ideally, more consequential. Now, at the end of the day, we're still attempting to abstract how many hits you can take before you die, sure. But with a wound system, you're attempting to have that exchange of violence carry immediate impact, rather than the simple long-term resource degradation of hit point loss. And wound systems accomplish this often by adding abilities or status effects or conditions to those violent exchanges. And I talk a lot more about building your own wound system in some of my previous videos, which I'll link down below. But this definition we have now I think is sufficient for what we're doing in today's video. Now, I'm a firm believer that wound systems best serve an RPG if the game is built around that structure from the ground up. It's not easy to tack them onto an existing system and have them land with the same evocation and efficacy. For example, a common house rule you'll see for games like Dungeons & Dragons is when you are reduced to 0 hit points, you'll gain a random wound. You'll roll on a d20 table to denote what the debility is you now have until maybe you rest. And though those help evocation in the game, they still only matter when the character's been reduced to 0 hit points. And if you have 120 HP, it might be a minute before you actually get a wound. It didn't actually serve the same purpose that I think wound systems should fulfill, which is making each exchange of violence into something more impactful. Because simply layering systems on top of each other won't always result in the aggregate you're looking for. Sometimes you're just creating additional resolution steps that don't communicate the evocation, that vibe you're attempting to create with those rules. Despite the challenges in layering wound systems on top of traditional attrition, let's look at why Daggerheart is primed to receive a wound system layered on top. Daggerheart has already packeted incoming damage for us with its damage thresholds. It already takes the infinite variety of incoming damage from 1 to 3 points of damage to 500 points of damage and placed them within 3 categories. That's helpful for contextualizing them as wounds. And sort of like the Tales from Elsewhere wound system, we can see that there are simply grades of incoming injury that hit the player. And because you're only ever marking 1 to 3 hit points at a time, barring outliers that the rules describes, we can start to packet these with conditions or status effects or debilities. So here's my pitch for the Daggerheart wound system. Whenever a character receives major or worse damage, so they would take 2 hit point loss or 3 hit point loss, they can spend a meta currency to convert that into a wound, adding a narratively or mechanically relevant condition or status effect to that bracket of hit points. For players, they spend their hope to trigger a wound on the enemy, and for the GM, they spend fear to trigger one on the player. And what you do is you put a little box around the hit points that you've just marked, and in that box you also write whatever condition or status effect is now associated with that wound. And those conditions that are applying with that hit point loss, with this wound, will persist until the wound is treated or those hit points are healed. And to treat a wound, you would roll some sort of action roll with a relevant stat to, patch the wound, give somebody a small poultice, or maybe coach them back into focus for the fight. This would then cross out the box, noting that that wound has been treated and its debility is no longer relevant. However, it is still a boxed wound on your sheet, and that's going to be relevant because of this. You see, hit points that have been marked as a wound cannot be healed unless all of the hit points in the wound are healed at the same time. That means if you have a 2 hit point loss wound, a major wound, you can't just heal 1 from one instance and then heal 1 again. You'd have to heal 2 from whatever that healing source is to remove it. Similarly, it makes a severe wound quite difficult to remove, because now you can't just heal 1 or 2 points to chip away at that, you must heal all 3. And this starts locking in chunks of your hit points, potentially until you receive major healing or even take a long rest. And this does make that exchange more complex when violence occurs, but because it's part of a meta-currency exchange, not every instance of battle would trigger a wound, and because to trigger a wound it must at least be a major or severe wound, then you're not going to have it every time you simply graze the dragon with your arrow or catch the bite of a wolf to the leg. It's only going to be when it's narratively impactful that it occurs. And it avoids death spiraling too hard because you can treat these injuries with just any action roll. You don't need to actually heal the hit point loss to remove the debility or status effect associated with it. You can, drag somebody behind cover and splint their leg to get rid of that debilitating arrow wound or broken knee or whatever you've described in the scene. That way, characters aren't spiraling downward to their eventual death with no way for the players to interact with it. And that aspect is vital for any wound system, a way for the players to interact with the debilities and avoid those consequences through action rolls, skill checks, consumables, or what have you. Otherwise, there is this feeling of inevitable death that comes from wounds, which can not be super fun at the table. Now, this doesn't change Daggerheart away from being still a traditional attrition-based structure, but it does make it more of a hybrid approach. You still have hit points, damage rolls, but you also have wounds that can occur when packeted from a single attack. If you are interested in seeing what a primary wound abstraction is, where there isn't any intervening layer of hit points, you could take a look at what I've done in Tales from Elsewhere. That one doesn't have any hit points in between the incoming injury and the wound itself. The wounds are the injury tracking, and I've modeled a lot of the layering I did here for Daggerheart on my own system. And if you'd like to test out this Daggerheart wound system, I have a write-up available for free on the Tales from Elsewhere Patreon page. It includes all you'll need to start trying it out at home, including example status effects and conditions you can use for your wounds that I think feel thematically and mechanically related and relevant to how Daggerheart plays, differentiated from, say, how my game uses wounds. And if you found this interesting, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Every week we release a new design discussion here on YouTube. We go into all sorts of aspects of tabletop role-playing game design, theory, and philosophy. And every week I also release an additional unedited and unscripted discussion on the TFE Patreon page for patrons. That's where I expand on last week's video, going into things I had to cut for time, more concepts, and sometimes going through the comments of the video. So if any of that interests you, consider checking that out. All funds from the Patreon page go to support the creatives behind the scenes of this project, whether that be artwork or editing. So I hope to see you here next week on Tales from Elsewhere.